I also tonight wanted to pause on a moment that happened that could only happen in America. Why? Where else does a poor kid with an addicted parent and no real prospects in a dead poor area of Appalachia, okay, become the vice president of the United States of America, the leader, second in command of the greatest country in the world? Look where J.D. Vance works now. The 50th VP at only 40 years of age. He entered the Oval Office for the first time. Speaker Johnson actually shot it on his cell phone. Take a listen.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Wow.
This is J.D. Vance's first time to step into the Oval Office.
Wow.
It's incredible.
This is incredible.
You don't have to appreciate him or his politics to appreciate that this is the American dream in effect. Now, what do I hope? I hope that he uses this opportunity to do as much for as many as he can. Now, that is also the charge for each and all of us, certainly in my position, and it takes me to how to analyze the administration's early efforts and ambitions. Let me take the easy route first. I'll tell you how not to do it. By analyzing Trump's words and playing gotcha that he doesn't know this and he was wrong about that and he exaggerated this, that's not policy. I know some will say every word out of a president's mouth is policy. Not with Trump, okay? It's not about what he said. Listen to what he says, but pay attention to what he does, okay? So we have to distinguish when you do make a change. Are you doing something to fix a problem versus merely changing the problem? How do we see that? Look at DEI through that lens and the early immigration actions, all right? Two big things. Now, on its face, diversity, equity, and inclusion are the basic ideas behind America. The question is, how are those ideals realized or not? The political argument that helped Trump win is that efforts to force DEI have gone too far and become a form of discrimination in themselves. That when you mandate hiring or acceptance on the basis of diversity as a top priority, you may wind up prioritizing things other than merit. That standards are reduced to accommodate inclusion. That merit can be substituted by race. Of course, the reason there was a push for more attention to DEI and to make it happen is because regardless of merit, minorities were not being given opportunity. For example, in 1980, all of the CEOs of the top 50 Fortune 500 companies were white. Now, is that merely because they were all the best? Probably not. Then again, today, only 37 of the top 50 CEOs are white men. Is that because the 23 people of color are better than any white applicants? Probably not. So, there's a change, but did it just change what the problem is, or did it fix what the problem was? Now, why can I make this assumption that they probably weren't the best and probably the people of color who were brought in weren't better than any white applicants? Why can I say that? Because I've heard little else than that from people who hire corporations, from people who have to do admissions at schools. They did see DEI as having become a burden, and that what mattered most, which was hiring or accepting the best, was no longer the goal. So you have to get back to first principles. I wish the first principle were that race is not a thing. We created it. You rip the skin off a guy like me and a black guy, you're not going to tell the difference. But we did create race, and too many make it relevant for the wrong reasons. So how do you balance fairness and diversity? The answer is talent. By not excluding because of race, nor making race the leading value either. Now, this isn't a political argument, it's a legal one. That is what the Supreme Court decided in 2023 in ending affirmative action. That you cannot use race as the basis for admission, that is offensive to the prospect of equal protection under the 14th Amendment. So the question is, how do you achieve the balance? Trump says by getting rid of any program or personnel that focuses on DEI in the federal government. Is that legal? Yes. Is it okay? Depends on the hiring practices of the U.S. government. Otherwise, getting rid of DEI just changes the problem, right? Of having a workforce, a government, a society that doesn't judge race as a basis of value, positive or negative. Now, the problem with Trump doing this is his own administration is a reflection of what happens when somebody isn't focused on diversity. For all the talk about reaching out, there are only 4 non-white members of his cabinet. You compare that to every president since Clinton, and he has the lowest number of non-white cabinet members. Clinton's cabinet was 29 non-white, Bush's was 27, Obama's 45, Trump's was 18, Biden's was 55. And if everyone's confirmed, Trump's would be 18% non-white. Now, look, Trump is also a question mark when it comes to diversity, right? Because of his father and his alleged rental practices, and some not alleged, shown in the 70s when he was sued by the DOJ for discriminating against black renters. And someone who worked very close with him in Atlantic City, the chief operating officer of Trump Plaza, John O'Donnell, said he did make racist remarks when discussing his hiring decisions. Now, look, I'm not litigating his character. I'm articulating the concern about getting rid of DEI and how will the hiring practices regard ideals that he says he cares about. Okay? Now, that is the lens to look through it. Getting rid of DEI, well, but what do you do in terms of hiring? Because does anybody really want people who aren't white to be discriminated against? No. Do you want white people to be discriminated against? No. You want a balance. And you shouldn't have to be forced to do it. But we'll now see if you're not forced, do you do it? We'll see. But just getting rid of DEI could just change the problem, not fix it. You see what I'm saying? I look through that same lens at the immigration reforms. Now look, this is low fruit for Trump because Biden did so much bad shazam for the last 4 years. The Laken Riley bill, okay? If it were simply about fast-tracking the removal of someone who is here illegally and then commits a serious felony, it's an easy sell. But there is more than that in that bill, and I know you're not hearing that, especially on righty propaganda TV and podcast outlets. But there are provisions in there that provide a really low bar for accusations of minor crime being enough to trigger a detention. However, the Democrats pushing back on the bill because it's going to be expensive and you don't have places to hold people, you know, that's penny ante, okay? First principles. None of these people are supposed to be here anyway if they entered illegally. So if they commit any crime, it could be seen as automatically disqualifying. The problem isn't where you're going to put them. That's not the problem, because we wouldn't even have that problem if the Biden administration and Democrats hadn't been so completely clueless to the problem of letting everybody in. So the Democrat pushback argument about how this is going to cost and that's about not wanting to fix a problem. It's just about wanting to change how you see the problem. Okay? And theirs is a less powerful argument because it's playing to the logistics more than the basic logic. The Democrats took a beating on immigration because if you are here illegally, the idea that you don't have to be removed, the deal of catch and release, is offensive to reason, to law, and to order. The reason they allow people to stay in the country, even if they're illegal, after they commit a crime, is not because it's too difficult and expensive to catch and hold them and remove them. It was ideological. And it gave a benefit to a population that, yes, commits crime at a lower percentage than the rest of us. That's true. But it is also true that if the system worked the right way, there would be 0% crime from people who entered illegally because they would not be entering illegally. And when you argue that you can open yourself up to a counter argument that if we spend a hell of a lot of money on things that matter a hell of a lot less than grabbing bad people who are doing harm to Americans, And I'm not saying to sweep up grandmas and grandpas and kids and people who cross traffic the wrong way and dreamers who got a DUI. I'm not saying that that's what you should do. Those are not the people that the administration has been talking about. That's not who Tom Homan was talking about. And we have to police that. They have to do what they said they would do. So that is the lens, okay? Are you doing something to fix or just to change? Is it enough? Is it too much? Will it work? That kind of cold pragmatism. And through that lens, let's examine what's happening around the country right now when it comes to immigration, okay? They say don't call them roundups. I don't like the optics game, personally, okay? This is like when they called it a raid at Mar-a-Lago, when they went in there, even though they didn't use their weapons and they didn't even have their blazers on, they didn't break in anywhere. Call it what you want, okay? Hey, thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your screen. And don't forget, click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.